I think the way technologies are communicated, well, there are two ways. One is technologies are very dangerous, and the other one is technologies are very difficult and complicated. And it's not, as I said, with the women issue or the female issue in entering the field. We have to bring people together, and if we want to have a functioning ecosystem, we have to break these silos and be more interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary.
Good morning, Space Watchers. Laura Todd here with you from London, where I've just visited Spacecom, but we're coming up for that time of year again. It's the International Women's Day, so I'd like to present this Space Cafe Radio with having a fabulous guest on, Rafaela Kraus, who is also in the area of space and aerospace and defense. So Rafaela, welcome.
Good morning, Laura. Thanks for having me in the Space Cafe.
What better way to have a cafe, or a coffee at least, than in space, I always like to say. Why don't you? Because the reason why we're talking to you is you've been doing some fabulous posts on LinkedIn, and you've got some wonderful insights for women in defense, women in aerospace. I can throw in stuff about women in space, but then also about education and whatnot. But I'd like if you could give an intro to our audience, who you are, what you do, and what your experience is.
Yes, I'm working at the University of the Bundeswehr in Munich. It's a university dedicated to education of our officers, our future officers in the Federal Armed Forces. So we have a special clientele at our university. But apart from that, we are a technical university. And I'm teaching business management and leadership. And my work focuses on entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, also in the public sector, but also innovation ecosystems. And I'm trying to help people with technology transfer, young innovators, young startups, especially in security and in defense and also in space tech.
I have to say it. So the Space Watchers that know me are going to be like, oh my God, this sounds like the perfect person for Laura, because you've touched on all the major points that we need to look at, including that whole entrepreneur innovation and how we bring that better into the more public sphere, the more commercial sphere. But then why don't we talk about why we're having specifically this chat today? So to get started, what would you say are the key challenges that we're seeing for, just in general, for women in aerospace and defense?
Yeah, I think if you want to really build stronger ecosystems in Europe, innovation systems in innovation of security and defense technologies, for example, I think one problem we face is that we have still our silos and we have still sectors which are not so diverse in a way. And if you think of the past of wokeness and diversity, it was a big issue in many countries and also in many fields of many industrial sectors and also in the public sector. But somehow with the change in the US and the disruptive policies, we see that wokeness is somehow now considered as, well, it's a thing of the past. We don't need it anymore. And I think we have in these fields of space and defense, we have very male-dominated fields, and we are not using all the talent and all the perspective which might be needed to build stronger ecosystems, to build a stronger industrial base, and to be more resilient also, because we don't need homogeneous employees in this sector. It's not only a fairness question, in my opinion, but it's a capability question. And we need all these capabilities from different persons and from different disciplines also.
You don't need to convince me. I think we have difficulty, and I think the English language is the worst for this. So I'm not apologizing for that to anyone that's native English speaking, because we take a word and then it gets really attached to a label, and then people interpret that in such siloed ways. And you touched on something that's much more important. What are the capabilities? What are the competencies? What are the characteristics and traits of different individuals that brings that diversity? And it's not just on the superficial, what a person looks like or gender or whatnot. I've seen experiences in that. So what kind of experiences and lived experiences have you had seeing that either work or be more of a challenge?
I think when I think of my work in the last years, I experienced that the different disciplines, the different ages also of my employees, the different ways of thinking, the background, the academic background they bring with them is very important when it comes to innovation. And I had a team with about 15 people, some women, the majority was men, but there was a quite strong female factor in this team, and also different nations which contributed, or different nationalities. And I saw that a lot of innovation comes from talking to people from a very different background and maybe also disciplinary background, because innovation is thriving on the borders of things, of organizations. For example, when you talk to your customers or when you talk to competitors, you get ideas and innovation happens. And if you're always in your own field and in your own silo, you won't get new ideas, and it's more difficult to encourage people to be innovative.
I can only fully support that. I had the privilege of being in that kind of environment. I worked in Airbus and Airbus Defence and Space, which is fully international. It has to be. And really understanding, and especially when you've got customers around the globe, you assume, they're going to think in a French way or a British way or a German way. No, you have to understand their perspective, and you need that diversity of thinking and opinion. That's interesting then, because, and you mentioned age, because this is something that when we look at how education is done, and we just have this period where it was like more of a, to use the term, woke mentality. Everyone is equal. We must treat everyone the same and whatnot, without recognizing actually it's the differences in diversity of thinking, of experience, innovative, that has that, and like that thinking outside the box. How do you feel that we're managing that in the education stream today?
I think that's also a problem where diversity of competencies matter a lot, because these security challenges are in a way very complex system problems. And when you think of defense and space, it requires engineering, it requires a lot of AI competencies, economics, but also ethics, strategy and entrepreneurship. And we need these different mindsets also, these different experiences. And when you think of education, I think that's really the long-term lever to change something. And we had, for example, in the defense sector in the last 30 years in Germany, we had a lot of research when it comes to technology, because technology on an academic level in the universities is often a very low technology readiness level. So you don't really know what's coming out of this, if it will be a defense solution or if it will be a space solution or maybe a civilian problem which will be solved in the future. But the research is going on, or was going on, for the last 30 years, even if we had this disruption with the fall of the Iron Curtain. But when you think of other fields, there wasn't so much interest anymore in, for example, security, resilience, or defense matters, especially when it comes to education in the field of business management or business administration and also economics. So we have now to solve a lot of economic problems, building a new industrial base, I would say, or industrial military complex in Europe. But we can't really build it, or we can build it, but there's a lack of economic expertise in this field because there wasn't any research, there wasn't any education. We don't have, for example, in Germany, I speak mostly about Germany, but in Germany, we didn't have any professorships for military economics, for example. Not one. Even at the universities of the Bundeswehr, we weren't doing a lot of research in this field because it wasn't funded and nobody was interested in it. And it was also a normative limit because of the societal view of defense, which wasn't very, well, not very positive. Yeah. You know, it was like gambling and such things. It was considered as a sinful business somehow.
Do you know what? It's funny. So this morning I had on BBC News, which I never watch because I find it over-dramatized. But it was interesting, exactly this. They had people on saying HMS Dragon had not yet left for Cyprus. That's a big thing, and you should have dealt with that. And everyone was like, now that something's happening, or why aren't we up to speed and all this stuff with defense and having the right military response? So yeah, it's interesting how it's fashionable when it needs to be. But I think the other thing I'd like to touch on is I saw a fabulous panel yesterday. It was really academics, business administrators, based in the USA mostly. And looking at what we're missing of developing, because we get these engineers that come through, in particular in our sector, but they don't have the other soft skills. They don't have the economic skills. They don't have the business skills or the communication skills. And these aren't like being put together because it was treated as this is just a tech engineering thing off to the side. And we're missing that whole ecosystem that enables it to actually develop real innovation and get into the public sphere. pause. So that is, I think you would appreciate.
Interesting. I must say, I think we really underestimate what the industry means for our resilience. I think the industrial base in the US, when you compare it to the European defense industry ecosystem, is totally different. We have one market, we have one currency, we have a lot of linkages between the universities, the industry, the military, politics. So it's a very closely knitted network. And if you compare it to Europe, we have 27 countries. We have a lot of currencies still with the euro. And we have the fragmentation of industry because every country wants to foster its own industry, right? So the outcome of it is more than 100 systems in defense which are competing. And the competition is not always leading to better systems, but to more costs and to an industry which isn't able to scale up. And that's also a problem for the startups because they don't have this big common market and they can't often export their goods to other countries because of very strict regulations. That this is really a hindrance. But on the other hand, it's also the capital market, which isn't as efficiently working in the US. And when I talked to a VC I think it was a few weeks ago, I talked to someone and he said, you have 7 times more costs when you invest in European deep tech startups. And the outcome is 7 times less than in the US. So it's also a question about money and about functioning capital market. And I think that's where research and also education in business matters or in economic matters is very important. And the third thing I want to add is that also helping politicians to make good decisions is also quite important because at the moment we see that the people who are helping in these matters are often interested in a way which is they have an economic interest or they want to sell something. And we need this independent people who help politicians to make better decisions in this field.
You know what? Again, you're just encapsulating. It's like you were there at SpaceCom Europe because you're literally summarizing what happened. There was a big event yesterday where there was all these investors outside the main SpaceCom. So you've got all the tech companies and the small companies and the startups and the investors off to the side. And we need that dialogue between them, not just on the economical element, which you rightly touched on, but how do we change the system? Because I find in my personal experience, the US is much more pragmatic about this, where, and I say this as someone that is British, Scottish technically, but British, where we hang on to old traditions or systems that were developed last century, and we find it very difficult to break through that mold. So I'm genuinely curious if you've got any thoughts on that. Because I would like a good answer.
I'm a big fan. Actually, I'm a really big fan of disruption of all kinds. But I think what needs to be disrupted most is the public sector and its organizations. For example, when you think of universities, I think the first university was in Padua in the Renaissance era. And from an organizational perspective, the structures and processes didn't change a lot. And we still live in this world somehow. And if you think of other bureaucratic organizations, for example, the procurement offices or agencies in Europe or for example, in Germany, they are organized in a bureaucratic principle, which is from the last century or even the century before. I think it was the 10th century before, actually, when Max Weber was building these kind of ideas. And we need somehow public sector organizations which are really based on law and which are very transparent for our citizens. But somehow we have to think about how to change these organizations, because we see they are not agile. They are very slow. They have processes which are so complex. And we really have to think about disrupting these organizations, because in my opinion, I see that most people think it's a given. We can't change it. It was always like this and it never is to be changed, or it's resistant to change. It's also resilient, but in a bad way. And this is where also academic expertise could help, because other industries, other sectors have found new ways of organization. If you think of Silicon Valley, for example, we have a lot of very agile organizations. We have a lot of innovation there. And it's not only because they are working with software or with I don't know, with AI. It's because of the way these cultures are built and these organizations are built. And we have to look and maybe get some ideas how we can change our public sector. But I think nobody's really talking about this. It's like the elephant in the room. It's like in space. When you talk of the European space ecosystem, you always talk about our great technologies, but you never talk about the thing, or seldom you talk about our lacking of access to space. And that's the same thing. It's like an elephant in the room. You want to change ways of working, and people are always, or politicians want to change these organizations to be less bureaucratic, but I think it's not working via the mindset only or educating people to think different. It's about the structure also of these entities and of these organizations.
So that's interesting what you said, because if we look at, again, it's coming back to those characteristics and traits and having the different types of thinking and not, I noticed that when you were expected to succeed as a female going through certain organizations, you had to act and behave like the men. Or this is the executive kind of profile, you must act like this. And yesterday I saw a really good panel again where people were talking about foundations that they built to look at this education and to bring in these different kinds of skill sets, led by women mainly. And there was a gentleman there, though, that was also promoting how to do MBAs differently. So is this something then that also we're probably not looking at those characteristics and personality traits that are needed that's going to give us that difference of perspective?
I wouldn't concentrate only on gender. I think it's one issue, right? And when I think of my own career, I often found myself also in a room where I was the only woman. And it was challenging sometimes because sometimes you won't speak up because you think, okay, maybe this opinion of mine isn't so important at all, or I'm surrounded by people who are from engineering, and maybe as a business person, this is not so important and not interesting for them. But it can be challenging. But on the other side, it shows how much opportunity there is for change. And we have to change because it's not only important to bring in other perspectives and to bring in women, but I think the environment we create in our organizations must be an environment where these perspectives are really valued, because that's the problem, that we often underestimate the role of culture and also these group psychology things, that people who are in the minority won't speak up or are afraid of speaking up. And that's also because there are so many women, right? And the visibility of women isn't so good sometimes. We have a very limited visibility of female role models, which leads to a kind of vicious circle, because if young women don't see female role models, they won't be encouraged to enter this field and to enter technical or leadership roles. And so we have to make these career paths also transparent for women and to make sure that they see it as an attractive field. And that's done by the German Federal Armed Forces, for example. They try this very hard. But I think sometimes women shouldn't be addressed like in these campaigns for women into STEM, for example, because it always seems to me like there's a very unattractive field and we have to sell it to you. And we have to show what is possible in this field and not do this because we know that women aren't so interested in these fields and we want to somehow convince you that you should do this. But we should convince people by the goals we are showing them. For example, if you think of space, I always think of space like a cathedral building in the medieval times, because space is a very long-term thing. If you think of going to Mars or going to other planets, it's something which is done maybe not even in the lifetime of one human being. And it was the same with building cathedrals. People wanted to do it for the glory of God, and now we are doing it for the glory of humanity, for example. And we have to show people that this is an endeavor which is attractive in itself and which is a cool vision for your own life, and not do this because we know you don't want to do it, but do it all the same. That's not the vision women need to enter this field, in my opinion. So I would change the marketing a lot for these topics.
I couldn't agree with you more. And another thing, one of the great ideas I saw yesterday was, rather than people do projects in school. And again, I say people because I totally agree with you. It should be open, like everyone's a human. what is it we're looking for, getting people excited about this. And they said, rather than building robots or UAVs or whatever, why don't we build CubeSats? So that they're doing something, and this is my space bias, obviously, but they're doing something going into space, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, exciting. You have to show people to get them excited about the future.
I totally agree. Because I could keep you talking all day, but I know that you've got to go and do that inspiration and teach the next generations and whatnot. What would you like to see as next steps or vision for the future that will make a difference?
I think if one thing I'm always talking about, that's connecting people and breaking up silos. For example, connecting universities, helping startups to get into the industry. In defense, it's all about networks. It's all about trust. And you have to be more transparent about these ways to enter the field. Also, politicians and the society as a whole has to be connected in a way to understand the importance of technologies. I think the way technologies are communicated, there are two ways. One is technologies are very dangerous. The one is technologies are very difficult and complicated. And it's not, as I said, with the women issue or the female issue in entering the field. We have to bring people together. And if we want to have a functioning ecosystem, we have to break these silos and be more interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. And I think with the upcoming AI world, we have the chance to do this easier than in the past, because AI helps us to understand fields which were closed shop before. Now we have the possibility to understand things outside of our own scientific background, our own professional background. It's easier to connect. And that's my vision for the future, to connect, to build closer cooperations, also between the civilian and the defense sector, but also between different academic disciplines and different industrial sectors.
I think that's a great idea. And then just for a last question, as for International Women's Day, who has inspired you throughout your career?
I had some leaders in my life. For example, our former president. She was for, I think, 16 years a president of our university, was Merit Nivus. And she was the first female president of a university in Germany, as far as I know. And I think she was also very inspiring when it came to space, because she was the first who realized that space will be an academic and also an industrial field, which is to be addressed a lot more than in the past. And she helped me to build Space Founders, our accelerator program, together with CNES and ASI. But I think she was one of the inspirations in my professional life.
That is what we need, and I'm sure that you're inspiring exactly in that same way. So thank you for sharing that. Like I say, we could have talked all day. And I like the fact that we talked about areas of interest for us, not because we're women, it's because we enjoy it. And I think this is also a message to send out to women for International Women's Day. Go for what you enjoy and your passion and what you love. Rafaela, it's truly been a pleasure. And I'm sure we will speak again at some point. Thank you very much for coming on Space Café.
Thanks a lot, Laura. And I wish you a nice day.
If you like these or other episodes of Space Café Radio, leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It is the currency of today. And if you want to stay on the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Thorsten Triening, publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space.